In this video we're going to show you how to do bank rules in QuickBooks Online. So here we are at the dashboard. All we do is we move our cursor over to banking and then scroll slightly over to the right and click on bank rules. And what that does is it takes you through to the bank rule section on QuickBooks. Here you'll see the list of all the rules that you already have set up on QuickBooks. There's only one on here, and at the minute it's only a Vodafone rule. What I'll do is I'll click on Edit just to show you what this existing rule looks like, and then we'll go ahead and raise one ourselves. So if I click on Edit, you're then presented with the bank rule screen. And all we have to do is basically run through the fields that QuickBooks wants some information for. So we start off at the top left, and we have to give this rule a name. So I find it quite useful to say what it is the rule's looking for, where it's posting it, and what the VAT amount or the VAT rate is that we're claiming on it. And that becomes quite useful when you start using bank rules more and more, because your list of rules becomes quite long. And having such an obvious rule name, it just makes it a little bit easier to find and edit the rule that you need to if you think, actually, that's not quite working out as I need it to now. So in this instance, we're going to say, every time you see Vodafone on the bank statements, please post that against telephone and claim 20% VAT. So that's why I've given it that name. So next field then is for money going out. We could do rules for money coming in. You know, if you have a customer that pays you an amount, every time you see your customer's name on the bank statement as money coming in, set up the rule for that. But this instance, it's us paying our Vodafone bill for telephone expenses. So it's money out. The next box then is saying which bank accounts do you want this to affect. Quite a useful feature on QuickBooks this, because some of the providers require you to set up the rules against every single one of your accounts. So it can become quite tedious. But QuickBooks says actually, is there 2 accounts, is there 3 or 4 that you want this rule to apply to? It'll save you typing it out 4 or 5 times. So in this instance we're saying yeah, all bank accounts. And then we move on to the conditions part of the bank rule. So we can set up a number of conditions, if this, then that kind of thing. But this is a fairly simple one. So all we're going to say is when the transaction meets all of these conditions, and we're just going to have one condition basically, and saying every time you see a description that is exactly the word Vodafone on my bank statement, then go ahead and deal with it. Just to run through the options there, we have contains the word Vodafone, is exactly the word Vodafone, or doesn't contain the word Vodafone. So a number of different ways that you can employ this. But for this instance, we see Vodafone on the bank statement. That's what we're going to base this rule on. So is exactly Vodafone. Then if we move on, what type of transaction do we want to set up? So it could be a bank transfer, it could be us writing a check. But I'm just going to go ahead and click on expense for this example. And then finally what we do is we move on to where you want this posting. So we could either, if we were keeping a purchase ledger, we could say every time you see the word Vodafone as a payment on the bank statement, please post it against the Vodafone supplier account, which is what this payee is. But in this instance, I'm just going to say, actually, every time you see the word Vodafone on the bank statement, just post it to telephone for me. Just deal with it straight away. I don't want to be maintaining a purchase ledger for this thing. So I search for the nominal, the expense type that I'm sending it to, so telephone. And how much VAT do we want to claim on this? So we know that Vodafone, the services that we buy from them, they all typically have 20% VAT on them. So to standardize this admin task, I'm just going to say every time you see it, just claim 20% VAT on it. We could, if we wanted to, we could split that transaction. That's quite useful when, for example, if you had a hire purchase agreement, a lease agreement, where the amount that actually comes out of the bank is doing 2 things. It's paying a little bit of the loan off, and it's also paying a little bit of interest. So if this was some sort of finance agreement, we could click add, or add a line, split it, and we could say actually part of this payment is going towards interest. So bank interest received, bank interest paid, etc. Quite useful. Some of the other products out there don't allow this split. I think it's quite a great feature, particularly for HP, for loan agreements, all that sort of thing. But this is Vodafone, it's just going to go straight to telephone. And then all we have to do is click save. So save, and that's that rule created. As I mentioned before, that was already in existence, so we're just going to set up another rule, for instance for British Gas. So if we walk through this again and click new rule at the top right, and just work through the boxes really. So I'm going to just give this a name, and I'm going to give it as the most obvious name as I possibly can. So British Gas to electricity, and claiming 20% VAT. So that's just the name. It's not actually doing anything that other than just naming the rule. And it's for money going out, not in. It's out. This is typically going to be an expense for us. We're going to apply that to all our bank accounts, just in case they take some money out of another bank account for whatever reason in the future. It just future-proofs this rule. Meets all the conditions. The description is exactly British Gas. So when it finds the words British Gas, exactly written like that, it's going to then apply the rest of the rule to it. So if we move down a little bit, we want an expense. This is not a bank transfer. We don't use checks anymore for this example, so just a straight expense. And we're not going to be running a purchase ledger, so I don't want this payment to be posted against the British Gas supplier. I just want it to go straight to electricity. So I'm going to skip that field and start typing light and heat, and choose light and heat. And the amount of VAT that this supplier charges us is 20%, so I'm just going to say every time you see it, please claim 20% back in VAT. And click save, and that's all we have to do. The beauty of that now is that we spent the time explaining what British Gas is, what Vodafone is. Every time it sees those suppliers or those descriptions on the bank statement, it's going to deal with them for you forever and a day. And it's well worth spending the time automating this as much as possible. I find with a lot of businesses, they get a little bit fed up in the first month or two just while they're creating all the rules, because it's a rule after rule. But typically after about 3 months, you've paid most of your suppliers monthly or quarterly. Some of the one-offs after a year might come in and just grab you a little bit further down the line. But spend the time at the beginning and set these rules up. It will really standardize the way that your books are kept, and it'll just reduce the amount of mistakes that are made. I come across many businesses where sometimes they'll post British Gas to electricity, sometimes to gas, sometimes to light and heat. And as accountants, we've got to consolidate all those figures. And also we've got to tidy them up. Some of them might genuinely be for something else completely different. British Gas, no doubt, are into other parts of, insurance and boiler cover and things like that. If all these are posted to the exact same place every time, then as accountants we can go in, grab all the transactions, say actually that one right there, that needs sorting, that needs dealing with slightly differently. So it really does help us if you employ the rules section of this product. So I hope that's helped. Feel free to catch me in the next one. Thanks guys.